Hello and Happy New Year from Saturday Morning Cartoons, the weekly podcast that revisits, reviews, and ridicules some of the world's weirdest animated series. Kicking off our second round of New Year's Nicktoons, I'll be your New Year's baby, Dave Trumbore. Joining me as always, my super strong and super naked co-host, Sean Paul Ellis. How's it going, buddy?
David. I'm doing well. How about yourself, buddy?
I'm doing good. I'm a little, maybe not concerned, just curious as to what's going on with your super nakedness tonight.
Just did one of those polar bear plunges.
Ah, that explains it.
As a cosplay character, though.
Oh, so you didn't actually do it?
No, I did it. But I did it in character.
Wow.
Like I dressed in cosplay. It's just naked.
That's dedication, though.
Yeah. I went as you may have known him. It's from a little short called Action League Now.
Oh, yeah, that actually does sound familiar.
Yeah, I went as the Flesh.
Oh, the Flesh. That makes a lot of sense. I went
That's
as Stinky
naked.
Diver, and it did not do well. Nobody really wanted to come up and hang out.
Well, a lot of people are also probably mildly upset because you're supposed to be doing like a polar bear plunge where you run into a freezing cold lake, but you were wearing thermals.
Yeah, no, totally. I can't do the cold thing. I was just in full, wetsuit. I was already in the water when people jumped in. Maybe that freaked them out a little.
With like a harpoon gun.
I mean, yeah, that's cosplay.
Yeah. No,
I was
that's
just
justified.
totally into this thing, dedicated.
I understand. You can't bring that harpoon gun to a con, so you gotta find other ways to incorporate your cosplay into everyday life.
Yeah, in real life situations. It just didn't work out the way I thought it would, but hell of a way to start off the new year. Of course, my friends, we were talking about KaBlam, one of Nickelodeon's Nicktoons. This is actually, I'm excited to be getting into this because this is our second round of New Year's Nicktoons. We did the first four ever, which are kind of like the classics. We did those last year. We're going to have links up on our page to those in case you missed them, but that was, Doug, Rugrats, Ren and Stimpy, and then I believe Rocko's Modern Life. And then we actually covered Real Monsters during a Halloween special too. So we actually did cover 5 of them. 4 of them just happened to be in New Year's Nicktoons. And now I'm happy to say this is the second round of that to kick off 2016. So Happy New Year to everybody.
Happy New Year, guys and gals.
Good times.
And robots.
Yeah, and robots.
I'm glad you're listening.
In the year 2016.
Oh, boy.
So in case you're not super familiar with what exactly KaBlam was, I feel like the other ones are kind of like household names. Everybody knows what they were. They had movies made about them, a lot of merchandise. KaBlam was a whole different beast entirely. So we're going to walk you through the history. Sean's going to kick us off with that.
Right. So KaBlam is an American animated sketch comedy that ran on Nickelodeon from 1996 to 2000. The show was developed as a fully animated showcase for alternative forms of animation that were more common in indie films and commercials. Each episode featured a collection of short films in multiple innovative styles of animation, bridged by the characters Henry and June, who I remember so fondly the second they jumped up on the screen.
Yeah.
Henry and June would introduce the shorts and have adventures of their own in between these different shorts. Although Snick aired many Nicktoons, KaBlam was the only Nicktoon created specifically for Snick.
Yeah,
and if you're unfamiliar with
that.
Snick,
Yeah.
it was Nickelodeon. It was Saturday Night Nickelodeon.
That's right. It was the big orange couch, if I remember correctly.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That
I
was
always
when they
wanted one of
had,
those in the house.
Yeah. Who didn't?
Yeah.
When you watched Nickelodeon back in the day, and they did stuff like Super Toy Run and Big Orange Couch and sliming everybody that was, possibly on screen at any point, how could you not want to be involved with all of those exciting, awesome, fun, cool-looking things that everybody else is having such a grand time? You're like, I want to get involved in that. And they're like, do it. Just send a self-addressed, stamped
SASE.
envelope.
Yeah.
And enter into these contests, and I did.
Yeah, I mean, who didn't, honestly?
Yeah.
I did all the time. Went through so many damn stamps. My parents were probably just like, all right. I think they actually got smart. They were like, you write the letter, put it in an envelope, and we will put a stamp on it for you and put it in the mail. Those fuckers went right in the trash, I'm sure.
Yeah,
I'm sure they're just, whoop.
like letters to Santa, and letters that had my hopes and dreams in them.
Yeah, they all go to the same place. This is why
crumpled.
I just throw my mail in the air at this point because it accomplishes about the same amount of things.
Dave's Postal Service is known for 100. Look, if you are going to do anything, make sure that you're doing it 100%. And the best thing about Dave's Postal Service, 100% your letter is not going to fucking get delivered.
No, we have a much better failure rate than Stamps.com at this point. We're roughly on the same level as the U.S. Post Office.
Or Panitney Bose.
Yeah. We're all in the same ballpark. It's a little spinoff we've done here.
Yikes.
But since KaBlam is just kind of such like a wide-ranging thing, we've actually got a bit more history for you guys. So the segment creators for this show include David Fain, Tim Hill, Steve Holman, Emily Hubley, Mark Merrick, Mike Perlstein, Mo Willems, and Coat Zellers. And I feel like you've probably never heard of those names. I never have. So I feel like just to give them at least one shout out here on the podcast would be a nice thing to do, because there were so many segments that were created for this show over the years. You have to give them their due.
Right.
The theme song, which we'll definitely get into here in a second, the theme song and all the original background music on the show was provided by the Moon Ska Stompers, a band composed of King Django, Victor Rice, and members of the Toasters and the New York Ska Jazz Ensemble. The music in this thing was one of my favorite things. Once it queued up when we started watching it, it definitely took me back.
Yeah.
Took me back, not aback. Yeah.
I was actually really surprised to read that it was the Toasters, because I actually saw the Toasters perform in Pittsburgh.
Oh, nice.
At Club Laga.
Yeah.
When it was still around.
Right.
And so that was, and I loved, I guess I started probably listening to ska in 94,
I was going to say it was the mid 90s, so like this thing fit right.
So it was like third wave ska was in full effect at that time. I had no idea that it was the Moon Ska Stompers until we were doing a little bit of research for this.
Yeah,
and so it makes sense that even when I was 16 years old, I was still absolutely watching this show on television, because maybe just subconsciously for the music, maybe just because I like cartoons.
Yeah, I think both are totally acceptable.
Yeah, it's going to be
the
a D,
Toasters
all
I
the above.
recognize more. I just like that it said like members of the Toasters, so it could have just been like one guy who did like a hi-hat. And that was it. That's our member. But since this one actually has, since KaBlam is a variety show, which is something that we haven't seen before, especially from the Nicktoons, we are going to walk you through some of the synopses for the individual segments. Now, we're not going to cover all of them, but since we watched the first episode of the entire series tonight, these are the segments that are covered within this one episode, and they're fairly common. They're the ones that you probably think of when you think of the show. So we're going to trade off here, but Sean, you have the first one.
Sure. We have Sniz and Fondue. It is an animated short that was created by Michael Perlstein about two ferrets, which kind of feels debatable.
Yeah, abstract ferrets.
Yeah, abstract ferrets, who often get on each other's nerves. 12-year-old Sniz, who's voiced by Rick Gomez, is the younger kid ferret that is very hyperactive and quite the troublemaker of the pair. While 13-year-old Fondue, voiced by Oscar Reba, is the older teenage ferret who is the nervous yet intelligent one.
This one's so weird. We'll get into all of these too, so don't worry if we're not digging into these yet. But the next one, which is definitely one of my favorites from the entire series, is Action League Now. It was made using Chuckimation, which is underused, I think. It's a combination of stop frame animation and live action shots where things are simply thrown or chucked or dropped into frame or wiggled around to simulate talking. It's the most janky bootleg form of animation you'll ever see, but it's amazing. The series followed the adventures of a superhero league composed of various action figures, toys, and dolls, mostly bootleg things that were just knockoffs of other things. This show was created by Tim Hill. Most episodes took place in the house of an unseen resident, and many of the characters were voiced by radio personalities from Pittsburgh. I just kind of threw that last thing in there because Sean and I have the Pittsburgh connection, so I thought that was cool.
Such a good Action League Now was, as soon as we mentioned KaBlam, that was the first vignette that jumped into my mind as something that I couldn't wait to recap on.
Yeah, and if you guys understood what we were talking about in our little banter intro, then that's Action League Now. And yeah, like I said, probably the first thing you think of. This was the next one that I would think of, though.
So Prometheus and Bob. Yep. It is a claymation stop-motion segment featuring a camera-recorded mission log of Prometheus, an alien who comes to Earth attempting to teach a caveman, Bob, everyday things. So from the use of fire to the act of ice skating, the result is usually a failure by the mischievous third cast member who was simply a monkey. The introduction, done in a mock government file format, describes the events as having occurred over 900,000 years ago.
You know, man, from all of these...
It's over 9,000. 900,000.
900,000. From all of these different shows, this one I think is probably the one that departs from like traditional stuff the most, because it's not just like, hey, weekly adventures of these characters that you get to know. It's like, well, we'll get into it. I don't want to get too much into it now, but it's definitely one of my favorites.
Right.
And then the last segment we'll be talking about tonight is Life with Loopy. The life of 12-year-old Larry and his strange experiences with his imaginative and adventurous younger sister, Loopy. The characters were animated with stop-motion puppet bodies, but their heads were created with cardboard. The show was created by Stephen Holman. This one, what's interesting about KaBlam is all of these segments have a very different visual look to them. Sniz and Fondue, traditional hand-drawn animation. Action League Now, just very realistic because they're just real action figures with some stop motion, but mostly this chuckamation, which is amazing. Prometheus and Bob, straight claymation. And then Life with Loopy, this weird amalgamation of like these puppet bodies and then the 2D cardboard faces, which they didn't have any depth to them. So whatever, if you were looking at them in profile or straight on or whatever, you just had to look at it straight on. They had to be drawn that way. They couldn't like turn around or anything. There was no 3 dimensions to them. So very, very distinct visuals for each of these. Hey, you want to throw it back to that opening song?
Yeah. The opening song, the like the second that came on, I got really pumped. I remembered it right
for
away.
Me, it was even before that. It was as soon as the guy says, "Wake up the masses."
Oh, that's
because it's very, and I hate giving you the opportunity to do this, but it was almost kind of that kind of reggae sound to it.
Oh, really?
I mean, just for like a second, I always heard that as a kid. And he's like, "Wake up, dumbasses!" I always thought I thought he was saying something to dumbasses when I was a kid.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that's what it sounded like to me.
Secret swear words.
Secret
for
swear
young
words.
Dave.
Yeah, Jamaican swear words.
Jamaican swear words.
I was into that as a kid.
Now there was I kind of always had it as pegged as some type of a radio announcer.
Oh, okay.
Sort of, calling out and signaling that things were happening. So
yeah, it's interesting because he's like, come everybody gather around. We got this party going. It's almost like a carnival barker, like, and the animation style of it too was like this weird kind of overlapping. You're kind of like flying on a camera through these different scenes. You're going through like a mountain scene, and then you're going through like the water, and you're going in through a bunch of different other things, and like stuff's flying at you, fish are jumping out of the water, there's planes going overhead.
Ton of onomatopoeia just coming and being thrown at your face
for a show named KaBlam. I mean, that kind of makes sense.
You have to.
But they also make up their own. Everything's like kapow, kaplooey, kablitz,
kaplitz.
I don't know if that one was in there.
But there's just so much that's in there. And then, I remember. So Nickelodeon used to do a lot of these, kind of interstitial bumps between the commercial breaks that they would take and the cartoons that they had that were airing at that time. And it was great, and I distinctly remember them because it allowed them to put a lot of these different animation styles, give opportunities to a lot of different artists to do these quick bumps. The one that is so distinct that I remember is like. And maybe this was just a Saturday morning cartoon one, but it was the one that kind of like very sing-song. It just goes, after these messages, we'll be right back. And
yeah, that was definitely a Saturday morning cartoon. I remember the different networks I think had like competing bumps.
So so like it's that same, if that little sing-song bump kind of sounds familiar, it's just a lot of these different networks were giving artists and different people and animators and stop motion people and claymation these opportunities to do these quick bumps, and they were so fun. The thing that's exciting about KaBlam is that it seems like then finally somebody just kind of pulled the reins in and was like, hey, you guys have done some fun stuff, now let's see where we can kind of take some of this and let's turn this into an actual show.
Yeah, what's interesting I think in the history of KaBlam, which was in its heyday in the mid to late 90s on Nickelodeon, it existed a little longer on other Nickelodeon shows or other Nickelodeon networks like the Nicktoons network. What's funny is I think they actually ended up using these segments, so they didn't keep them together as a show for the most part. They actually used a lot of these segments as bumps because they're only about 2 to 4 minutes long. So sometimes they used them as filler in between other episodes, and sometimes they used them as little bumps and stuff too, especially like the Henry and June stuff, I think. So in later years, they did just kind of like dismantle all of these episodes and just reused different segments over and over. So it's kind of an interesting way that it progressed. But while we had it was in that variety format where everything just played out over the half hour. Yeah.
And the thing that stood out to me as being very distinct and interesting is that for the intro and then the Henry and June like sort of through line that we had for everything, it had very, very thick line. The animation style was very thick lined, and so as we will see sometimes in cartoons and comics, there's sort of that outline or that trace of a body that contrasts sort of the background or something potentially that they're holding or something that's on their body. This was interesting because that was so prominent and distinct. They made some of the times when like June or Henry would move their hand, like their thumb had like an unbelievably giant like black outline around them. And I remember that, and even in the Sphinx in the beginning intro that kind of waves it swats its paw at you. Same thing, just very thick outlined around that. I wonder if that's a specific style. It was just really, that was the one thing that as soon as they jumped into the Henry and June stuff, immediately popped into my mind is like, oh, I remember this style. Like for this era of Nickelodeon, I definitely remember this. And it led me to believe, and I want to go back and check and see. I'm curious if the people who did Henry and June did some of these bumps that were on Nickelodeon at the time too.
Yeah, I think that at least the intro definitely is cast in the same kind of like animation style as Henry and June are. It's very much it's very cartoonish. It's very kind of like free flowing and sketchy almost. Henry and June are almost just like, you can almost see the like sketch lines in between each cell, each frame of the animation, because it's just very loose and free flowing, and like their body proportions change all the time. They've got, sometimes they got like really big feet and sometimes they got a real skinny head, and sometimes it's for depth, so kind of like where they're moving, or if they're moving themselves, they'll like accentuate like a foot's coming towards you almost off the pages of the comic book, because that's how this thing was supposed to be set up. So we can get into the Henry and June kind of framework of this. They're basically your guides through this episode and your hosts and your introduction to each of these individual segments. So they kind of have their own thing going on in their own pages, but then they also go in and out of these different segments too. This one was interesting because it was the actual introduction. So like Henry is just like, hey, and welcome KaBlamoids. Welcome to KaBlam. And he tells you like exactly what KaBlam is all about, which I thought was pretty cool.
It's and just the overuse and ever-changing modification of the word KaBlam.
Yeah.
KaBlamoids,
KaBlamites, I think. Yeah.
KaBlamites. And so there's just so many different variations and mutations of that word. They really are trying to reinforce the fact that the show is named KaBlam.
Yeah.
Like
Can't miss it.
Right. It's over the top, but I mean, at that point when you're watching it, you're like, this is fun, and you can see that they're enjoying what they're doing. Yeah,
it was fun. Now I have to ask you, probably at the end of this episode, I'm going to ask you to rank like these segments, and we'll include Henry and June as a quote unquote segment. But just kind of like first impressions after watching it again, like where do Henry and June where do they hit on your nostalgia meter?
Well, I had watched another intro that you had sent out, and it has them doing a synchronized dance for a period of time, and I distinctly remember watching that episode.
I remember most of these, but not. It has to I have to watch it and it has to trigger something in my mind. I couldn't tell you like a different intro that I had watched or something. I don't think I could just pick one out of my mind right now and just be like, yeah, I totally remember that. If I watched it, I'd be like, okay, now I remember this.
Yeah, I before watching this, I wouldn't be able to pick one out of the air to be able to recap either. It was just for some reason when that dancing came on, it reminded me, like I just snapped into place with that show where I was when I watched it. So that was really entertaining to see something like that. The one thing that was always curious to me, and I guess because I had never had this exposure to this style of theater or acting, was how much of Henry and June was very clownish.
Oh yeah.
because there were these moments where like something would appear, or like they would produce something out of their hammer space,
Right.
or whatever they were doing,
like a trash can or whatever. Yeah.
Right, and they're breaking the fourth wall.
Oh, yeah.
They're addressing you, the viewer, and so there were these moments where they would sort of look at you and then look at the thing that they had created and then look back at you, and that's in like clowning. That's just simply doing like a take.
Yeah.
Like you're looking at the audience, you're looking at the thing, and then you're looking back at the audience, and it was very fun to suddenly see that sort of artistic construct or teaching.
Yeah.
Applied and mapped into something that was a cartoon that I grew up watching. So kind of crazy to suddenly see and understand why that choice was maybe made then.
Yeah, exactly. And it kind of provides sort of like a connection with the audience too. Like, hey, are you saying this thing? Because I say this thing, and now we're going to do something with it. So it's almost like they're your vaudeville hosts. They're your live hosts that are right there with you seeing crazy stuff happen. We can kind of talk about what Henry and Jude do. We can talk about what they do in the entire episode now rather than go back and forth. Because they just have a couple little like weird bits that they do. And yeah, you remember the first one that opens up?
Let's get into it. Yeah. June is working on a machine that will automatically turn the pages, so that Henry and June, as Henry builds this, they are your guides. They are the people who are going to turn the pages for you.
Exactly. So you can just sit back and watch
and introduce each one of these comics. Right. And so I guess June is maybe fed up. But, for your introduction to June, you're just like, well, she's industrious.
She's crazy.
And she also kind of seems a little bit lazy.
Lazy, but also insane.
I can appreciate that. Yeah, exactly.
Because like Henry's kind of like, he's just like, hey, and welcome to KaBlam. And then he's like, and there's my sister June. And they just show her with like the welder's mask and like sparks flying everywhere. And she's just like really going whole hog on this thing. You don't know what she's making. Right. And then they kick back on this couch and they reveal this like massive, it almost looks like a giant printing press. And you're just like, what the heck is this? And she calls it like like Page Turner 9000 or something?
Yeah, Page Turner 9000.
Yeah, which is just this giant machine that basically just reaches out of the page of the comic book that they're in and starts flipping all the pages. And then
Except in this instance, it begins to flip the pages too quickly.
Yeah, that's their little gag that they use. So like June's just like kicking back, having a good time. Henry's like holding on for dear life. He's about to fly away. I love that June takes this opportunity. It's a funny little animation gag too, because if you think about it, and if you go back to like the earliest days or the most primitive ways of doing this, animation is basically just a series of still images. So it's sort of like if you go to the bottom corner of your textbook and you just draw a bunch of images in progression and then flip through them, you have an animation still. So you can just draw like little stick figures moving around or whatever and then flip through it, and it tricks your eye into thinking that they're actually moving because it's just a series of these images. So that's actually the gag that they're doing in this bit. And June, like you mentioned, Sean, does the little clowning kind of thing where she looks out at the audience and she realizes like, oh, I'm being animated right now, so I can just do all these funny things like the Egyptian walk or whatever she wants to do. And it was just like a cute little moment that kids probably didn't really get. It was just something silly. I just thought it was interesting that they kind of had that extra little gag thrown in there.
It's funny now because as a kid, you just sort of are sitting there and watching it and you're just like, all right, cool, just get to the cartoon.
Yeah, yes.
You kind of feel like this is just kind of killing time until you get to the actual thing that you want to watch. But it's interesting to now watch it and just be like, oh no, there's a reason. Like they're having fun.
Right. But it's basically like your Nick Cannon in between your
exactly.
your whatever the guest that's going to do his trick next.
Whatever the
I don't even know the name of that show. Who's
I love it.
Which American does a great thing? That's the name of the show.
America's Got Talent?
Also that.
I don't know. I really don't know. If it is, great. If not, I'm just glad that Nick Cannon does stuff.
Good job, Nick Cannon.
Just good job, Nick Cannon.
Yeah. But they're basically, so they do some other silly stuff. Like they'll do, at one point, they make these comments and jokes on animation itself. So the next one they do is they're like, hey, we're going to practice our speed runs. And you're like, well, what is that? And then they do like the very stereotypical like Hanna-Barbera cartoon run, which they call the bongo run, right?
Right.
Which once I watched that, I was like, okay, this is actually pretty funny. And then I started wondering, like with Foley stuff, like I wonder how they actually went back and made this sound, this very iconic sound. If you've watched any Flintstones, Jetsons, any of those old kind of classic cartoons and seen a character like run quickly, you know the exact sound that we're talking about.
Right.
I liked it though, because then she kind of like looks over when they stop running And she looks over at the guy, and she's like, all right, Chip, cut the bongos. And it's just like this big guy sitting over by an on-air sign, and he's just playing bongos rapidly, and then he just stops. So just silly stuff like that was pretty funny.
Yeah. The other one that like jumps to mind is they are doing this like golf tournament.
Yeah, I think that's the very end of the episode. The last one. Yeah.
Yeah, the final one, they're doing this giant golf tournament, and it's going all the way across the country, right. and one of them is a location that's like in New Jersey is where it starts.
Yeah.
It wasn't like Hoboken. It was something else.
I can't remember the names. Some of them sounded made up, but who knows?
So they go through like Great Lakes and all these other things, and then it ends in the Grand Canyon, and all Henry has to do is sink the ball into the Grand Canyon. He's very, very dangerously close, and you think there's going to be like a certain amount of like some stakes that are involved in this,
or some crazy thing that comes out of nowhere.
Yeah, and there's not. There is none. He taps the ball, it manages to go in, and he's just like, and June is the entire time instigating him to screw up the putt,
right.
Kind of making cough noises and sounds in the background to potentially screw him up and throw him off of his game.
Because I guess he's never beaten her before?
Yes, she has never beaten him before.
Yeah.
So she gets to that point where she loses. And Henry's just like, I did it. Well, we'll see you next episode.
Yeah, there's nothing. There's nothing
like,
to it.
That's it.
The
and
whole gag was that like the hole at the end of this, the literal cup at the end of this hole is just the Grand Canyon, and that was the whole gag.
And then Henry falls into the fucking Grand Canyon, and you're like, what?
Well, see you next time, maybe.
David, I don't know about you. Have you been to the Grand Canyon?
I have not, man. I've driven past it both north and south of it, and I have yet to hit that sweet spot in the middle.
Okay, I've been hiking a number of times through it.
Yeah.
It's a pretty dangerous place.
Yeah.
Like if you fall down like you'd get severely injured.
So only go if you're a cartoon.
Yeah.
Is what we're saying. This is our PSA for tonight. I'm going to start the year off with a PSA.
It's better than some of the PSAs that we've done for people
we've cleaned
last
our
year.
act up. Yeah. And by we, I mean mostly me.
Do all the drugs.
Do all the drugs, kids. Take drugs from strangers.
Jesus.
I might have combined a couple there. Okay, so now those are kind of our in-betweeners. Those are our Nick Cannons. We're going to get to the main segments of this. So now, arguably, I don't want to color your expectations here. So we're going to get to our first one, which is Sniz and Fondue. Now, if you remember, this one's supposed to be about two ferrets. And Sean threw out the caveat that is you can argue over that description of whether or not they are ferrets. If I wouldn't have read that description, I would have had no clue what these things were.
I would have thought that they were weird dogs.
Weird dogs.
Like weird dog things. Like groundhog dogs, maybe.
So to give listeners out there kind of a visual, these things are all like different heights. There are 3 males and I think 1 female. The female you can tell because she has like a big bouffant blonde hairstyle. And possibly boobs. I'm not sure if she did or not.
She did.
She did. That's awkward.
She was named Bianca.
Yeah, Bianca.
Yeah.
And then there's Sniz, Fondue, and I can't remember the other guy's name.
Yeah. I don't even remember. I don't even actually remember if they introduced him or not.
No, and that's the weirdest thing because the hosts kind of serve as an introduction. They say something to the effect of, and now for 2 guys who are worth their weight in body parts, Sniz and Fondue.
Yep.
I'm going to start introducing us as 2 guys who are worth their weight in body parts.
It made me, that moment made me think of every bad show that I've ever been a part of, or any open mic that I've ever been introduced,
right,
where the host just lies about what they're like. Next coming up to the mic is my favorite person in all of DC. Like, shut up.
Yeah,
just
you don't
shut
even
your
know
dumb
me.
mouth. You have no idea who I am. And so, it's or even improv related, anytime that I come out on stage and people are just like, because you will go up. If I've hosted a bunch of shows, right. I've hosted quite a few shows in this past year, and so it's been one of those things where you always go up to the people and you're like, what would you like me to say about
give me
you?
something. Yeah.
Just give me anything. I'm happy just to say, like, you are what your name is.
Here's this
and please
name.
welcome them to the stage.
Yeah. Well, now you can say they're worth their weight in body parts.
I'm going to say that they're worth their weight in body parts, because nothing says welcome to the stage and then just you give that person the middle fucking finger.
Yeah. And just sell them on the black market. I think that's totally acceptable. So that's our intro to Sniz and Fondue, which tells you nothing. But basically, you've got these characters that are just they're kind of just long rectangles with weird hairstyles. I don't know how else to describe them.
Like red kind of button noses.
Yeah.
Like red kind of clown noses, maybe.
Yeah, clown nose, kind of brownish skinned creature looking
brownish
things.
Orange, burnt sienna.
Yeah, burnt sienna. You could literally just draw like primary shapes on a piece of paper and then just take out roughly 3 crayons and completely draw these entire characters. Like,
well, I mean, if you really want to distinguish who Sniz is, he's got a green mohawk.
yes, and he's a real ass. So he's
real
pretty
dick.
easy to spot. And this one, so we don't know what the family dynamic here is. When I was a kid, I thought maybe they were just like a weird family. That, Bianca was maybe the mom or a sister, and that one of the other guys who looks kind of older was maybe a dad, and Sniz and Fondue were brothers. But from at least this first episode, there's a letter that they write to Sniz that they all just say that they're his roommates. So just a bunch of ferrets.
I was so confused by that because the whole episode, the conceit of the episode is that Sniz, they are attempting to teach Sniz, the guy with the green mohawk, how to tell time.
Exactly. On like an analog clock. Yeah.
Right, on an analog clock. So he's 12 years old.
Right.
Doesn't know how to doesn't know how to tell time.
Right.
Doesn't know how to twelve time.
Doesn't know how to 12 twine.
Doesn't know how to 12 time. So he doesn't know how to tell time, and so he's concerned. Everybody in the house except him, except Sniz, is concerned that he needs to learn this life skill, and so they
can stop being bothered by his ass.
Yeah, which honestly though, telling time is not such a super complicated. Get the little $10, $8 Casio watch with the digital display.
Okay,
Done.
now here's my question. How did you learn how to tell time? I was wondering if you were going to bring up a digital clock for this kid.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I was wondering.
I mean,
how'd you learn how to tell time?
probably-
I remember distinctly how I learned.
I don't remember distinctly.
Do you remember if you
how
had
did
like
learn?
a paper clock or something in kindergarten, or if you had like a
Oh, we definitely had paper clocks.
paper
we
clocks
made
you had to
paper
make
clocks in
and
kindergarten.
and you had to push that
the little
thumbtack
pin
thingy
that
through.
spawns out on the back and then you rotate it.
Exactly.
Yeah, that little shit.
I had that, but then I also had this
That nightmare.
That nightmare. I had this old, maybe listeners out there will know what I'm talking about. This plastic clock that was like a Fisher Price thing with like huge numbers on it and big dials, but it was a cuckoo clock. So it was like a blue cuckoo clock, it had yellow dials, and it actually had like a chimney on the side. It was built like a little house, but cuckoo, like a German cuckoo clock. But it had a chimney that you would like push down, and that would advance the hours on the clock. So like every time you pushed down, it would like zip along another 10 minutes or whatever. Anyway, that was the thing that I had to learn how to tell time, because my dad would he'd set the thing to noon, and then he'd just be like, set it to this time. And I'd set it to this time. And if it was right, he'd tell me, and if not, then I just had to sit there until I figured it out. So that's how I remembered learning how to tell time on a clock. Not like this ass. I mean, they go through, the roommates here, they go through the trouble of making a not even life size, like Big Ben size clock face.
Right.
And then the two guys hold it, and they have Bianca kind of like stand there and alternate her arms so that she's telling different times.
Right. She's the different hands.
She's the hands of the clock. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Sniz is laying there on his back just like, I don't give 3... What's he say?
I don't really care what's going on right now.
What's he say? I don't give 3 squats what you guys are doing.
Yeah, I don't give 3 squats. Oh, fruits!
Oh, fruits! That's my favorite new swear.
Jesus.
Triple fruits.
Double, even triple fruits.
So he doesn't care, because he's just like, look, if I need to know what time it is, I'll just come ask one of you guys. And their answer to that is like, look, that's why we're doing this, because you're a real pain in the ass. And one of these days, you're going to need to know what time is, and we're not going to be there.
Right.
So, of course, obviously, lo and behold, that's kind of what happens. Sniz has a couple instances. One, he's watching TV, and there's a special on like ballooning that he's really interested in watching for whatever reason. This is well before DVR.
Yeah.
And they say it's going to be on at 7 o'clock. So he then proceeds to run around the house while everybody else is busy doing stuff. Like, I don't remember what Fondue was doing. I know one guy's like changing a light bulb. What's Fondue doing?
Fondue.
Oh, he's ordering a pizza.
He's ordering a pizza, which is very curious, because 13-year-old Fondue seems to always be wearing a blue smock apron
and like a
blue chef's hat.
Yeah.
But he's 13.
But he said he was doing business. He was placing a business call.
He said he's making a business call, but he's ordering a pizza.
This is how Papa John's got started.
Like, how? I want to know what circumstances led to a 12 and a 13-year-old getting kicked out of their house, where they have to get roommates.
12 and a 13-year-old ferret.
Ferret.
Yes.
Where they find 2 other ferret roommates.
Yeah.
and they set up shop. Ugh, I don't
It'd
know.
be great
And-
if they
and
lived in a house with like the connecting like tubes, like the clear tubes, and like
oh
a
my
weird
God,
wheel,
that'd be amazing.
and like a ferret ball that just chase around all day.
Like a big wheel
Yeah.
that they can spin around on, and the little water droplet.
Yeah, see, that'd be fun.
They just do the like that.
Yeah, for 5 minutes.
I love it.
Yeah.
Love it.
But no, so he
so-
runs around. So Fondue is placing a business call, by which he means ordering a pizza.
Bianca's in the shower.
She's in the shower, which that did not go how I thought it would.
No,
she didn't scream.
I thought it was gonna get sexy.
I didn't think so. I thought she was going to scream and like punch him in the eye, so he'd like walk out with a black eye. No, he walks out with a bar of soap in his mouth.
I was thinking it was gonna get like American Pie style sexy.
I mean, it could have.
yeah.
And we just cut to it later.
Ooh, Snick After Dark.
Oh, that's. Are you afraid of the dark at that point?
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So yeah, he interrupts Fondue's pizza order. Do you remember what he ordered? Just for fun.
Oh yeah, he says he goes I want a pizza with Roni on it.
Yeah.
And he's like, and the guy's like, "Wah?"
Roni
He's like,
Schweish?
He's like, Roni, Wah? Pepperoni, come on.
So if you ever order pizza, a Roni pizza, just shut up
just
and
jump
hang
off
the
a
phone up.
bridge.
Say
asshole.
pepperoni, you ass. Not Roni.
Just do it like everybody else.
Yeah,
just
just
order on
conform.
an app. Just order on an app so you don't have to talk
Yeah,
to
also
people.
that, and then have it delivered by a drone. So we've got Fondue on the pizza, we've got Bianca in the shower, and then nameless guy is on like a rickety ladder changing a obnoxiously large light bulb in the hallway. So basically, Sniz comes up, runs up behind him, and asks him the time, and I don't think he quite startles him. I forget what happens when he gets startled and like knocks this guy into the ladder and basically just ruins everything from this point on.
Yeah.
It's just a comedy of
Oh.
errors at this point that he's trying to
Yeah.
figure it out. And then they just cut to like Sniz asleep in bed. So
Yeah. There's no circumstances.
no, I mean they've only got a
there's
limited
no,
time
there's
here.
no there's no yeah. There's nothing that like matters.
No, the amount of
So
time
he-
we've
he
spent talking about this one segment is longer than the entire segment. So
Right.
yeah.
So suffice it to say, they plan a prank.
Yes.
On
/
Sniz.
lesson.
Yes. So they write him a note that says we are going ballooning on a Saturday morning at I believe it was 10 a.m.
10 o'clock sharp.
10 o'clock sharp. So they're going there, and then they write on Sniz's head in permanent marker,
Yep.
"Do not tell time."
I love
Which-
the grammar of that one. Do not tell time.
Do not tell time.
Or don't.
Ugh.
Yeah. No, don't
Yeah.
tell me time.
Oh, don't tell me time.
Don't tell me time.
So don't tell me time. So he wakes up. He gets excited. About the ballooning note. He runs outside.
Yeah, straight
First
out.
woman. That,
Well,
yeah.
he goes to run straight out the door, but he looks at the clock first, which is already at 10 o'clock. So even if he knew
Right.
time, he'd be shit out of luck.
He's
So
screwed,
what's the
he's
point?
screwed.
But he says it's
And they're
10 o'clock, and
they're
he like
already in the
struggles through it.
balloon.
What's that?
Right, and there are his friends are his roommates. No, his roommates are already in the balloon.
they're
and
already
just
there.
like, his loss.
Like, oh well. So,
So
at
he
first he
bumps
couldn't
into-
even set an alarm clock to begin with. It didn't
Right.
matter if he could tell time or not.
Sure. So he bumps into a couple people,
Right.
and they tell him that they're not going to give him the time. Then Sniz suddenly sees in the distance, he sees the hot air balloon, and his roommates are yelling down to him like, "Hey, you missed it."
I got to tell you though, I love the guy in the car. So he
Okay,
goes up to
good.
this guy in the car and sees the writing on his forehead. But he goes up to the guy in the car. The guy reads the writing and he just like laughs at him when Sniz asks him to tell time. Like a real jerk though, like a real jerk laugh. And then when Sniz is trying to read backwards, this kid is real dumb, so he can't even figure out that it's backwards because of the reflection. So he's trying to read it backwards, and the guy's like, "It says don't tell me time, dumbass," or something to that effect. So then Sniz sees his buddy is already up in the balloon. So obviously the smart thing to do would be to run to the nearest roof, try to jump off it, and to climb onto the balloon with them. Right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes total
And
sense.
it worked out pretty well,
to
right?
Get on top of a building,
Yeah.
run and jump off. And they're just like, "Yeah, I need a lot of space. This is gonna be a real wide jump."
Yeah.
And then he gets to the edge and
just
practically just falls straight
Sinks
down.
like a stone.
There's a giant clock face, and he gets stuck on the minute hand. Somebody says you're gonna have to wait until 10:30,
Yeah.
and in that exact moment, he says, "But it's only you're gonna have to wait till 10:30." And he goes, "But it's only 10:05. I have to wait another 25 minutes."
And they're all like,
and everybody's like,
He learned how to tell
"He
time.
learned! Yay!"
So that was funny because like it's his lesson learned, and as the minute hand's going around, he's like, "Now it's 10:10. I've only got 20 more minutes, and now it's 10:15."
It was not 10:10. That's what drove me nuts.
No, the
It-
10:15
hand-
one and the 10:29 one drove me crazy because they were
Not
not
even
not
fucking
even
close.
I remember that Fisher Price fucking clock, and I know how to tell time, ladies and gentlemen, and it was not even close.
Dave Trumbull,
Very upset
grown ass
about
man
this.
that can tell time.
That's right. This was the one moment so far in this segment I really didn't laugh. I'll be honest with you.
Nope.
I really didn't laugh. The only time I laughed was so the reason he had to wait until 10:30 was because when the minute hand was down at the 6, which is where the half past the hour is, there was a little door like an old cuckoo clock. All right.
Right.
So there's a little door. And one of his buddies was like, "Make it to 10:30. There's a door. You can go inside and whatever." So he lands and he's like, "It's 10:30. I'm finally free." And this fucking cuckoo clock just comes shooting out of the door and just knocks him off the building. And I didn't see that coming for whatever reason. That made me laugh. And then he goes through this like sequence of not really Rube Goldberg, but just like really funny Looney Tunes kind of things. Like he falls and he bounces off the convenient awning company's awning. He smashes into like Hercules Anvil Company's anvil. He flies through the coverless fan company's fan, and then he almost gets launched into a giant knife that's just pointing out of the side of a building, but he just smashes into the brick wall instead. And it actually made me laugh too, and just smashed into the brick wall.
So that whole sequence of events of just like slapstick, bodily harm humor is going to come into play. Well, I mean, we're kind of transitioning out of this episode now.
Yeah, that's pretty much. What else happened in the end? It was pretty much.
Oh, the girl with the yo-yo, and she's like, "You have the time," and he just like passes. out.
Yeah.
And that's the end.
So that's
just
it.
like,
so,
okay,
like, he kind of learned his lesson, and then he paid for it in the end. So
that was a thing.
a little silly.
Yeah.
So that was all very traditional hand-drawn animation. Now we jump to, after a Henry and June interstitial, we jump to the very different Chuckimation style. Right. Which is the best. If Sean and I were ever actually going to do like an independent show, I would prefer that we do it in Chuckimation because it's got the least amount of production quality.
Not because we're lazy, but just because we find this style of animation so insanely funny.
Also because I'm lazy.
Also because Dave's lazy. Yeah. So, hey, there's no harm in that.
No.
So we are, of course, talking about now Action League Now. Right. And so this whole episode, so I want to set the scene for this because these characters are so distinct. Well, we have a naked guy.
Well, let's actually. Do you want to go through the theme song kind of quickly because they almost have like a sub theme song here. Right. They have the Action League Now theme song.
Right.
So yeah, who do they? I think they introduced the Flash first.
They introduced the Flash.
Yeah. Who's super strong.
Super strong.
Super naked.
Thunder Girl.
Yep.
Because she flies like thunder.
Makes sense. And she's basically just like a large Barbie in like a unitard with a thunderbolt. Right. Yeah.
With like a Flash style thunderbolt.
Yeah. And Flesh is just basically a large He-Man character without any clothes on.
Right. Yeah. We have Stinky Diver.
Right.
Who is a ex.
He's like a Navy SEAL.
He's like an ex-Navy operative.
But he's really
they throw his action hero down the toilet.
Yes, so he just like lives in the sewers mostly.
Yeah,
Stinky Diver.
And then they introduce the last guy, Meltman, with the uncanny ability to melt.
With the power to melt.
Melt.
And he's just literally, if you had ever put a G.I. Joe in a microwave or just like burn the shit out of it with a magnifying glass.
Or firecracker.
Whatever. He's just severely burned and damaged and melted.
Yeah.
But it doesn't really affect him too much, at least not until this episode gets a hold of him.
Yep.
Oof. So
this episode does open up with Meltman and Thunder Girl.
Right.
And they are...
just being awkwardly held by someone off camera.
Yeah.
And just shake. Anytime they talk, they just kind of do like a little wiggle shake just to let you know that they're the ones talking. If this happened...
I'm doing it right now.
If this happened in real life, there'd just be people wiggling all the time. It would be insane.
It's great.
Yeah.
So they are, I guess they're in the mayor's office and they're looking for
the evil
a
mayor for some reason.
The evil mayor. Yeah. We don't really get any history or any of the ideas behind evil mayor, but he's named as an evil mayor, so we're taking him as face value. Got it. So they are in his office. They're looking for a formula. Meltman is taking photographs with like an old timey kind of like shutter style camera.
Yeah, with like the
80s,
like a cable switch where the cable runs from the shutter and you actually have to push it from the side. Yeah, which I think was just to be able to hold him up without a hand being in there like on screen with it. Yeah, they just welded him to this cable. Yeah.
So they are putting a Meltman are welding him to take these photographs. He's taking them and he's just like, Chief is going to be so excited. He's going to kiss me.
Yeah.
And then something happens and he falls.
He tries to take a
off.
picture of. He wants to take a selfie.
He wants to take a picture of himself.
He wants to take a selfie with an old ass camera. So he wants to take a selfie, and then the flash goes off, and he's taking so many pictures, he's just blinded by the flash, and he's like, "Oh, look at all the pretty stars!" And he just bonks into the old school big desk telephone, knocks that off. He falls, and then is hanging on like the corded phone, hanging off the edge of the desk, and he's like, "Oh, it's just like in the films." And then one of my favorite things in this episode and all the instances of Action League Now happens, which is just blunt force trauma to the characters. It's one of the most refreshing and just
I think I now
enjoyable
understand
things, yeah.
why you want to do Chuckimation, because you just want to chuck shit at action figures.
I just want to drop heavy shit on inanimate objects, and it's hilarious. He gets hit, and it's beautifully filmed because he falls off the phone, he smashes into the floor, and you just watch him like bounce, like you just dropped an action figure, and then the handset hits him, and then the phone base hits him. So it's just like this Three Stooges slapstick, just series of just really painful events that you're just watching this action figure go through, and that causes no real physical trauma except that he has temporary amnesia.
Right.
Which you think would be fine, right? Because they have all those photos of the secret recipe or whatever they call it.
No, he left the cap on the camera, so none of the pictures turned out. So they are doing everything they can with a science tech, who I think they just call science guy,
just
or like
the tech.
the tech,
science tech.
Science tech. And so science tech is working.
He looks like an Egon Spengler action figure with like a fake lab coat on or something.
Right.
Yeah.
So he is trying everything possible that he can, and they're just like, there has to be something that we can do to get his memory back, to get him
with science.
Get him over this amnesia. He's just like, well, there is one thing, but it's pretty dangerous. And they're like, we'll take the risk. Yeah. So the next sequence of events are them just dropping some of the heaviest shit.
Well, first they have him like strapped to this gurney, and he's got these like thumbtacks just pushed in like every angle of him imaginable, and it's like hooked up to these fake, it's almost supposed to be like acupuncture / like electrodes, because they have it all hooked up to these wires. You think they're gonna like zap him, but yeah, they just
around him is a circle of mouse traps.
Yes, exactly.
And the flesh is tied to a piece of string, and he's holding a hammer.
It's just right
and
over.
So they drop the flesh with the hammer onto him, and then it triggers all the traps. You're just like, what?
It's just ridiculous. Like, you could tell they just had fun setting that stuff up, even though they had no clue what was going to happen when they actually did it.
Like, number 2, they put him on like this rotating Lazy Susan, and then what they do is they just drop another Lazy Susan and a bowling ball on top of him, and just smash him flat. Like,
what else do they do to him at one point?
The third one is then that they drop a huge safe. They're like outside in a yard, and they drop a giant safe on top of him, and and then the flesh lifts it up and is just like, "Hey, buddy, you okay?"
And he's like, "You are super naked."
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
Well, that didn't work.
Which is a catchphrase that we need to note, because then it comes back at the end of the episode.
That's right.
So, it's
so it's just not working at this point.
Yeah, they get through all this slapstick,
all the blunt force drama.
Yeah.
And then they do basically like a hypnosis kind of thing to try to get his memory back. So the doctor basically has him on this gurney, and he says to him, "Okay, Meltman, we're going to do hypnosis. When I count to 3 and say who you're supposed to be, you're going to have all those memories back." So he's like, 1, 2, 3. And before he can say his name...
And a dog barks.
This little plastic dog barks. So Meltman is now got the mind of a dog. So he just starts like barking and growling at this dog, and then just starts like running away. So
he runs outside, right?
And as dogs do. Where does he run?
He runs right onto the street.
This is great. I mean, terrible, but great at the same time, because he just gets mowed down by this car in the middle of the street. Life-size car
breaks him.
Like,
life-size car.
Like our life-size car, not his life-size car.
They do a really fun camera trick with this, because they have Meltman kind of like glued in a position, and then he's on like a string, and they're kind of like pulling him along during certain portions of this. But there's a long sprint that he has down the driveway, and they just, instead of actually animating it, they just do a shaky cam, like of somebody kind of running down as if you are Meltman, kind of jaunting down to the end of the driveway. And so they get there, and then at that moment, he's out in the middle of the street. He gets ripped apart
just
into like
exploded.
7 or 8 different pieces.
All his pieces
like,
go
just
flying.
Brutal.
But because he's Melt Man, they just kind of like Frankenstein him back together, and he's more or less okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he and the best thing is that, you know, they've tried everything.
Yeah.
They get to this point where he wakes up and he's just like, hey,
Oh, hey
I
guys,
remember everything.
what's going on? He's like, well, first he's like, I think I'm in heaven, and all the angels look like Thunder Girl. And then you just see this, like, the rotating, like, dual images of Thunder Girl in front of him until it, like, resolves into the real one, and you're like, oh, no, he's back.
And she just goes, I liked him better when he was a dog.
Yeah. It's like, poor Melt, man. This guy's just been blown up, smashed to
God,
pieces.
just give him a little bit of a break.
Seriously, man. I think
So
he's got a
we
thing
find
for the
out,
flesh.
yeah, right. So we find out in this moment that the secret formula, we get the contents, we get the bulleted list of everything that's on.
Yeah, he, like,
this-
wakes up, and he's like, 3 cups flour, 1 cup sugar, 2 sticks of butter. What's that about?
like one cup of chocolate chips,
Yeah.
and they're just like, oh, it's the evil mayor's chocolate chip cookie recipe. You're like, okay.
The chief is so excited, though.
Yeah, I've been trying to get this for years. And in this moment, something happens where the chief like stumbles backwards.
Well, right before
or
that,
the flesh.
right before that, Thunder Girl is like, "Oh, Chief, Meltman was so excited he thought you were gonna give him a kiss." Yeah.
Oh, that's right. And so the chief and the flesh both go down to kiss him at the same time, bonk heads. The chief goes and flies back in
Launched.
like a gasoline can, and a box of nails fucking fall on him.
Smashes him, and it's just shit like one thing after another. That basically all the stuff you have piled up in your garage falls on the chief at this point.
That was my impression, was that this cartoon was made by somebody who had a garage that really needed to do a better job organizing everything that was there. But in the meantime, he's like, I'm going to mutilate these action figures.
Yeah, it's like I kind of have to clean it up. My wife's getting on me, but I got this camera and these action figures. Let's just make something happen.
Yeah.
So then the chief kind of comes to, and he's kind of okay, except for the fact that
He just looks at the flesh and he just goes, you're super naked.
da 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 da.
And that's the end.
End of Action League Now. I will say that Action League Now does come in 2 parts. So they normally would start it, and then when something crazy happens, they would cut to the commercial, and then they would come back and finish it up. So it's kind of their midway point, even though we have 2 more segments to go yet. So yeah, that was a lot of fun.
Yeah. So we'll roll right into Prometheus and Bob. This one's pretty quick.
Yeah, and I love the way that these are set up. So it's always with this like title card where it's got this weird kind of alien looking script, and then a caption will come up underneath it and it'll say like tape and then a tape number. So this one's like tape 37, and then it'll have a
Bridge.
subject. Yeah, bridge. So it's like that's what this one's about, bridge. And to give you a visual, so these are very kind of like the crude claymation. You have the tall alien Prometheus, he looks like one of the Greys, but he's very tall, he's very skinny, he's very purple. And then you have Bob.
I like that you throw Greys out. Like everybody's just like, yeah, I got an abduction story that I want to talk about.
Everybody knows about the Greys.
I'll save that for another podcast.
You know what the Greys are.
Yeah,
Just
right.
watch X-Files when it comes back on. You'll see the Greys.
Yeah, true.
So that's Prometheus, and he's usually got a spaceship around or whatever. He's got this little clicker that he uses to like record and stop recording on his mobile camera that follows them around. And then Bob is just very much like a Neanderthal that he's just wearing like fur underwear, and that's it. But he's just very dumb. And then occasionally this monkey just kind of comes around and screws with him, which is probably the funniest part of the whole thing.
I want to say the interesting thing about this is that the dialogue is very simplistic.
Oh,
this
it's
is
so great, though.
This is an exercise in visual storytelling.
Yes, very much so.
Through and through. And so that's what's fun about this one, is that there are these moments where you see in this one, Bob demonstrates holding a saw,
Right.
cutting down a tree,
Right.
and then that tree falls over like a small like fissure that's in the ground.
Apparently super deep, though.
Yeah, super, super deep. And he walks across it, and he demonstrates a bridge. And then he beckons, and a lot of his voice sounds kind of like,
Yeah, they're almost digitized. Yeah, but like mass,
Right.
like you don't quite know what they're doing. Because there are moments where he's like, "What the hell are you doing?" And you can like tell
Yeah,
what he's
you can
saying,
make it
but he doesn't
out.
actually
Yeah.
say it. Yeah. And Bob, meanwhile, is just like, huh? Yeah.
And so a lot of it is just the simple kind of call and response where he'll motion. Prometheus will motion to Bob, and then Bob will have some type of a reaction.
Usually completely opposite of what Bob wanted, or Prometheus wanted him to do. Yeah.
Right.
Because comedy.
Yeah. So they go through this whole process of trying to understand this bridge and getting this bridge to go over, and they hit like 5 or 6 like decent beats.
Yeah, and they're quick too. They're snappy. So it's like all based around the same thing, which is this bridge and trying to teach Bob how to cross it, and shit just keeps going wrong. So like Prometheus will walk across it, and then Bob will try to jump and like fall, and then once he rescues him, then Prometheus will fall into the cave instead. Or into the fissure instead, and then the monkey shows up and just causes all kinds of havoc. So like Bob will
monkey grabs the saw, hands it to the monkey grabs the saw from Prometheus, and then the monkey hands the saw to Bob,
who's
and Bob's
sitting on the
log, and he just begins cutting it, and he falls down into the fissure.
That's
and
probably
so
my favorite.
Yeah, so there's just a lot of a lot of like just slapstick visual storytelling, the entire time, but. It's pretty much you're in and you're out with this one.
It's super quick. And they used to, if I remember correctly, they actually used to do 2 because they were so fast, but I think people loved them so much that they used to do 1 tape and then followed right by another tape, or they'd have 2 within the same episode because they're so fast.
It's actually really challenging because when I watched KaBlam, I did not enjoy Prometheus
really?
and Bob.
We'll talk about this once we rank them, but this was, well, you'll find out. But I always wanted to watch... I really didn't want to watch anything but Action League Now and Prometheus and Bob.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
So that's pretty much it for this one. It's really simplistic. Yeah. It's kind of a visual, like Sean said, the visual medium. So it's better to just go watch that one than listen to us idiots talk about it. So we've got our last segment coming up now. This is Life with Loopy. So remember, this is the weird one about this family that they're all stop motion animated with puppet bodies, but they have cardboard faces. So it's a really weird visual look.
Yeah, which is a really interesting aesthetic to see that these. So for the bodies of these, it's interesting. Cardboard cutout faces, where on the cardboard cutout faces there would be the eyes and the mouths would be animated.
Right. So they probably just like swapped out the whatever the eye expression or mouth expression had to be for that frame. Yeah.
Then they have puppet-esque bodies.
Right.
Where you can definitely see the strings that are attached for their hands. There are then moments where they actually just have like marionettes, as we see in this episode, just a straight puppet marionette being controlled. And then they also randomly throw in live action.
Yeah, like people getting off a bus.
And it was such a mixed bag. Yeah. Of things that were going on that it was, and it's very fun too because you can see that there are a lot of the settings that they have, especially for the house at some point when you see the backyard, like you can tell like, oh, this is just like a tiny little replica house that somebody probably built, and they're probably filming this like on their dining room table, somewhere with like
this was like super low budget stuff,
but the aesthetic of this was always so beautiful.
Yeah. It was different. It was always weird to me as a kid because I had a tough time equating like, all right, there's puppets and then there's these weird faces and then there's stop motion and then there's live action puppet work and then there's live action human work, and I don't know, it was a lot for me as a kid to kind of like, but it was zany. It was fun.
Yeah, the mixed media nature of this I really enjoyed, and I think it was something that always kind of drew me towards this vignette, and so I don't know this. And I also have a little sister.
That would probably,
That was sometimes, more often than not, a real pain in the ass.
Especially like this episode,
Yeah, right. So I could totally relate to a lot of the stuff that was going on with this. So I enjoyed it.
Yeah, so this one kind of goes back. So like in the opening when Sniz was being a little jerk and didn't want to learn how to tell time, in this one Loopy is refusing to take a bath. So what happens, like that old, urban legend or wives' tale or fable that your parents would tell you, you start sprouting vegetables.
Right.
Yeah, you start sprouting
vegetables. That's what
happens. And not just like mushrooms and stuff, like full on like zucchinis and potatoes and.
Can you imagine?
Oh God, I would never shower.
That we have all the places that are in the world that have food and hunger and famine problems, and sadly those people don't have access to clean water or to showers. If that just happened where they just naturally grew mushrooms and potatoes
food that they could eat from themselves,
just like zucchini from under their armpits and then potatoes out of their ears and mushrooms on the back of their heads.
I don't know why these people are complaining if this is scientifically accurate.
Some good urban foraging at that point.
You are your own farm.
Right.
Yeah. No, it's funny, though. It's a very silly scenario that I love the way that they play it, though, because the brother is kind of the only one who's kind of irritated with everything. The father is, too, to an extent. But the mom's
Right.
just like, well, I mean, what do you have growing today? We'll see what we can make up. And she's like, well, I got these potatoes. And the mom's like, oh, I can julienne them into fries. She's just like looking for opportunities to like new recipes and stuff.
That was definitely. I was watching this episode with Melanie,
Yeah.
and she just in that julienne fried moment just goes, "What?"
That'd be my reaction. Like, what can
what
I
is
make
going
out of
on?
these? Yeah.
Yeah.
But then her father at one point, because it gets ridiculous, the kid's walking around, she's not showering, she's sprouting all kinds of vegetables. The dad's like, look, you're living under my roof, you're going to go shower and live by my rules. And Loopy's like, well, I'll just go live in the backyard then.
Oh, and live in the backyard she does.
Yeah, she does. And she thrives in the backyard.
With a little bit of sunlight.
And then some
That's
humidity.
in the backyard.
Yep. Turns into basically a garden.
Yeah. Big enough that a forest ranger shows up and declares that it's now become a new national park.
His face was so
And-
janky. He freaked me out, man.
So,
That was one of those
because
like live puppet things, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was one of the marionettes
Right.
that they had. But the problem with the ranger marionette was that you could see the string from his upper lip to his mouth, and where the mechanics or where the mechanism was in place to control the jaw, but nobody was pulling that string, so his mouth just hung open the entire time, which is just like that, with a loose
Just he had
loose
no
jaw the
muscles
whole
in his
time.
jaws. Yeah, but he was talking. And they just like would just like jiggle it back and forth. It was really just terrifying.
I love the fact that the dad in this moment is just kind of like, I don't know about this. I'm a father. I've got things to do. And the ranger's like, well, you get a park ranger hat, and he's like, yeah, I'm listening.
Yeah. And they put the little hat on his head, and he's like, yeah, you got my attention. Well, now you have my attention.
Now you have. I was a fine Southern gentleman. You now have my attention.
Mr. Ranger, you had my interest, but now you have my attention.
It just made me think of Leonardo DiCaprio.
Exactly, that's what I was going for with the old
As
Django.
Candy from Django Unchained.
sir.
Yeah.
So at this point, we get a little more mixed media because people are showing up to this national park in droves, but not puppet people
Right.
and not cardboard face people. Just
These are people getting out of a. These are actual human
people.
live action people.
which had to be the
getting
animators.
out of a bus.
It had to
right.
be.
They must have had so much fun with
They
this.
look like animators. They look like people who had not been outside of a studio in years. They had fun, I'm sure.
Yeah, I'm sure.
But
they
I'm
did.
just assuming it was the creators because it was just like, who else would you get to just be like, hey, we need you to come by the studio, just step out of a bus for like 5 seconds, and that's it.
Or maybe it was their friends, because I mean, doing fun stuff like this, for any of the weekend film projects
Yeah,
that
that's true.
I've done, it's always so much fun to call up a friend and just be like, hey, can you come and do this like 5-second thing
Yeah.
on film? It's gonna take 2 hours for us to probably film
exactly.
it, but we just need this 5-second thing for
You
you
may
to
or may
have
not
fun.
be cut out of the finals.
Yeah, we're probably gonna cut you.
Right.
You're gonna be on the editing room floor in Tony Lazzaroni's bedroom.
That's
but
right.
still the opportunity's there for people and friends to have fun. And like, I know we've had our guest Mike Visser,
Yeah.
who came on with Tony for Clone War, and Mike has done so many random cameos in some of the movies that we've written for Crowded Elevator, and it's just awesome to see him come in and do like 2 or 3 lines, and then he's done. And he's just like, I had a fucking blast
Done
with
for the
that.
day.
Like, yeah, I know.
No, that's fun. So that's definitely what
Great.
these people did too. But the funniest part for them was they kind of come off this bus and they look around and they get their binoculars out and they start looking around like they're really interested. And then what was it? Loopy decides that she's done. She doesn't want any part of it.
Oh, tourists show up.
Right, yeah.
And she's like, ugh,
Tourists. That's right.
ugh.
So she kind of like breaks
And
away from
that's-
her own foliage and decides to go back inside, and the whole garden just kind of like rots away. So
In seconds.
all the tourists get back on the bus and they're gone in like 12 seconds.
And then it solves one problem, but it creates another problem. It's like,
Well, the dad loses his hat.
yeah, it's like what is it, like the like you have mice in the kitchen, so you buy a cat, but then you can't get rid of the cat,
get
so
a
you buy
dog.
a dog, and then you can't get rid of the dog, so you read Old Yeller to it. I don't remember the adage.
That's pretty much it.
Okay,
Yeah.
fair. So so now Loopy now Loopy has been held up in the bathroom for 2 days and will not come out and share the bathroom with her brother.
So her brother's just standing there like pounding on the
Larry's
door like
like-
she's been there for 2 days.
Do you remember the nickname that she is, like something Stinky Pits? she
She
calls him at the end
had
of
a
the
bunch of
episode.
good little like one-liners, but no, I think Stinky Pits was the one. She's like, hold your shorts there, stinky pits, or something like that.
Yep.
Hold your horses,
I was
stinky
like-
pits.
Like, yep, all right. It makes total sense.
Yeah, and then Henry hits a hole-in-one into the Grand Canyon. He's like, well, see you next time.
End of episode.
End of KaBlam episode number 1. So now's the point where I want to ask you, let's go through those 5 and just rank from worst to best. So which is your least favorite?
I'm gonna say Sniz and Fondue.
I think I'll agree with you on that one.
Yeah.
All right,
I think Sniz and Fondue.
what's your next one?
This is hard.
Including Henry and June too, don't forget.
Yeah, I'm probably gonna throw Henry and June in there.
I'm with you so far.
Okay.
All right, so next.
I'm gonna say then Prometheus and Bob.
I'm gonna say
This is where we might differ.
I'm gonna
This
say
is where we're
Life
gonna
with
differ.
Loopy here.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then I think we're just switched for the next 2. My number 3 would be Prometheus and Bob, and yours would be Life with Loopy,
Yeah.
and then obviously we'll switch that. My number 2 is Life with Loopy, and your number 2 is Prometheus and Bob.
Yeah.
I think we can both agree that Action League now is
the
the
number
big
1.
winner in
Yeah,
this.
I think that's probably the best one. I don't know. I was thinking before like that and Prometheus and Bob because I really did love the style of storytelling. How it's just so there is no dialogue. It's all that physical humor. And as a kid who like grew up watching Three Stooges, it was like the same thing. So it was like watching
Right.
Three Stooges just without any dialogue. And I just had a blast watching it, wondering what they were going to do next, and just all that silly stuff. So
It's
a
funny,
close
even
one for me.
growing up with Three Stooges and watching Prometheus and Bob as a kid, I was just like, I'm not really super into this. But like watching it now as an adult, I'm like, oh no, this is really well done. This is very smart.
That was the one that I
Crap.
watched with my brother, he was probably 6 or 7 at the time when this came on, and that one was I
Okay.
think the one that got like the biggest laughs out of him because there was just like
Okay.
a stupid caveman and then a alien who kept getting hurt and then a dumb monkey, but he didn't really know like a lot of the dialogue and stuff from the other ones. So I think he would watch that and he would just crack up, and that always made me laugh. So I think
Nice.
they're a close 1 and 2, but other people have different opinions on this one. So we do have a
Ooh,
review
boy, do they.
recommendation. This
Yeah.
one's fun. Actually, I sent you 2, I think. Did you get a chance to check out that second one?
Yeah.
Do you think that that's the same person from before? Because it's almost like verbatim what we've done before.
It's kind of interesting. I was curious whether or not I don't know. Do you want to read the first one?
I'll read the first one. We'll decide if we want to read that second one or not, because I feel like it's
Okay.
verbatim one that we've read before, the same damn person. Anyway, so this review is titled Even Beat, quote, All That. So in other words, I think it's better than the show All That. This is from Lifelike from Seattle, Washington, back in 2005. Any hardcore Nick fan as myself, back in the 90s when the programming was good, would know that KaBlam was the best show on the entire station, topping even the SNL for Teenagers spin of All That. KaBlam featured 2 animated characters, Henry and June, who hosted a comic book Esquire sketch show. I'm thinking they meant comic book-esque, but
yeah.
also Esquire.
Esquire.
Show featuring regular acts, Life with Loopy, Sniz and Fondue, with special scripts. The show was humorous to the extent that even as a teenager, I longed to see the show again. Good news, it's online. But like all good comedic shows, KaBlam went down just as SNL and All That did, grabbing for new plots until they canceled. It was a significant loss to Nickelodeon, which now airs shows that aren't in the least bit nostalgic. But we will always have
Well,
our
that's-
memories,
that's
I
how-
suppose,
oh,
as cliche as it sounds. Boldface Live, by the way, Nickelodeon does nothing but nostalgia on their variety of networks. They have networks dedicated to
check
nostalgia.
Go check out Splat.
It's just called Nickstalgia.
Nostalgia.
Yeah.
Is it really?
No.
Oh,
It might be
I
at
love
some
that.
point.
That's a great name.
Yeah, well, trademarked.
Damn.
Do you want to read the second review from the second time we've heard from Grace Zay?
Yeah.
Unless
let
I
me-
had
let
like
me
a
read
weird
the-
deja vu here.
Let me read this because this does sound dangerously.
It sounds like
dangerously
copy
close
pasta.
to another. Right, it does. So I'm going to be curious if we, as we do these Nicktoons, if we find Grace
For
reviewing
every
other
single
stuff,
show.
and we just get copy pasta from.
I'm going to look for Grace Zay every
Entire-
single time I pull one of these now. These are both from IMDb, by the way.
So we have just the title is "Okay Show." I don't know if she's simply saying like to the show, she's like, "Okay show, it's time to wrap this up," or if she's like, "Okay
We're
show."
like, that's an okay show. Yeah.
That's 7 out of 10 stars from Grace in Chantilly, Virginia. This is back in 2006. She said, "I used to watch this show when I was growing up. When I think about it, I only remember it vaguely." Well, that's how memories work, Grace.
I think you
remember, if
literally
you
said
ask
that
me-
last time, too.
Yeah, probably. I'm just a copy pasta of myself.
But it's fine because we're reading the same damn review. I'll be your Slender Man.
Thank you. However, if you ask me, it was an okay show. Two things I remember pretty well are the opening sequence and theme song, which are pretty much
Here's
the
my
same
favorite
thing.
quote of this review.
Yeah, I know. In addition to that, everyone was ideally cast. Also, the writing was okay. The performances were okay, too. I hope some network brings it back so I can see every episode. Before I wrap this up, and please do.
Yeah,
Please feel free to wrap this up, Grace.
Before she moves on to the next show, where she's just going to copy this fucking review.
Before I open Apple C, open Apple V this shit. Before I wrap this up, I'd like to say that I'll always remember this show in my memory forever, even though I don't think I've seen every episode. She's killing me every time. Now in conclusion, thank God, if some network ever brings it back, I hope that you can catch it one day before it goes off the air for good.
I swear to God, this is like verbatim from, I can't remember what it was, but it wasn't that long ago.
Let's go back and check our show notes. Yeah.
It wasn't that long ago because she ends it in the same way. This like now in conclusion, check it out. Like,
I'm truthfully, if we find that this is not Grace and it is another person who listed their Gmail address,
we should invite him on the show.
In the review, I'm going to email. I know I joked about emailing people last time, but I will email these two people and send them the reviews and be like, if you two have not found true love, I'm gonna play Tinder.
Let's put you together
over Gmail.
Lifelike and Grace is
Oh boy. So we should probably get to some recommendations.
Well, do you recommend this one for people to check out?
Yeah, I'd say definitely check this one out. I'd say at least check this one episode out and see.
Yeah, this was episode 1, by the way. I don't know if I made that clear. Yeah.
Sort of with the variety and the style that goes into the show, I think it's worth checking out. I think the aesthetic for some of these are beautiful, but it can be really hit or miss. Yeah. I feel like the show, certain segments are very polarizing. So, it's tough. If you find a segment that you really do like, you can probably just YouTube that segment and find all the clips for it. And then sort of cut a lot of the fat of the Henry and June stuff, or Fondue and Sniz.
Yeah, or if you happen to like them, the cool thing about the variety aspect is like, yeah, you will probably find stuff that you're not a huge fan of, but you'll find stuff that you really like. So luckily now in the internet age, we can just find those bits and pieces that we like and not suffer through the other stuff.
Thanks, Internet.
Yeah, thanks. You're the best, Internet. So I'm with you, Internet. Sean. I'd say definitely check this out, just like we have for, I think, all the Nicktoons so far. And we will get to what we're coming up to next in just a little bit, but I want to turn it over back to Sean. He's going to let you know what he's got coming up in the next couple of weeks.
Oh man, I don't have anything really planned until Valentine's Day weekend. I'm going to be performing in San Diego for the San Diego Improv Festival. We'll be in the, I believe, 9 o'clock showing. You can find out more information online. Just Google San Diego Improv Festival. If you don't have a date for Valentine's Day, come on out and hang out and see my show. Yeah. I won't be your date, but I'll give you a high five afterwards. So.
That's a good deal.
Yeah, fair enough. We also will have shows kicking back off for Washington Improv Theater. You can always find more information about that at WITDC. That's WITDC.org. Dave, what do you got going on, buddy?
Well, first of all, where can the folks find you on social media if they are so inclined?
They're gonna find me and they're gonna love it. You're gonna find me on Twitter and Instagram at Sean Paul Ellis.
Wonderful. And actually, Sean and myself will actually be appearing on yet another podcast.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, we did an episode of Law and Order Special Viewing Unit with our friend and previous guest on the show, Matt Reuter, as well as Aviv Rubenstein. And they actually do a show where they're in the middle of going through every single episode of Law and Order SVU in order, and then doing a podcast episode about it. So we joined them for the 11th episode of the first season, and that should be coming out in just a couple of weeks by the time you guys are hearing this. So look for that towards the end of January, early February. We will let you know when that show is live, and you can listen to us be idiots over there as well. It's a pretty good one.
It was a lot of fun, and we were extremely happy that Aviv and Matt asked us on their show.
It was great. It was good times. As for me, you can find me over at Collider.com. I'll be doing reviews for shows like The Flash, Arrow, and The Walking Dead when they all come back on from their mid-season break. Yeah, looking forward to that.
Yeah.
There's a lot of new shows coming out, too. So Collider's a great place for movie and TV news, especially as we kick off the new year here. You can also find me on Twitter at Dr. ClawMD. You can find out more about Saturday Morning Cartoons at our website, SaturdayMorningCartoons.com. Remember, that's morning with a U. You can also find us on Twitter at MorningTunes. Check out Sean's handiwork over at our Tumblr page, SaturdayMorningCartoons.tumblr.com. You can find us on Facebook and YouTube. You can listen to us each and every week through iTunes and Stitcher. And if you'd just like to drop us a line, suggest an episode for the future, just send us an email at SaturdayMorningCartoons@gmail.com. That's going to do it for us for this first episode of New Year's Nicktoons 2016. Sean, buddy, what are we talking about next week?
I don't know. What are we talking about next week, football head?
Oh, you football head. Move it, football head.
Move it, football head.
I just want to find a saxophone so I can just play this theme song for the next week. I love this theme song so much, man.
It's good.
It's so jazzy. It's so chill. Hey Arnold. We'll be talking Hey Arnold. And this one's actually been in the news lately because they are kind of bringing it back for a new season.
Bringing sexy back.
Also bringing sexy back. So we will see how that plays out. But we will update you on Hey Arnold, past, present, and future next time on Saturday Morning Cartoons. Happy New Year, and thanks for listening. You know, a wetsuit. I was already in the water when people jumped in. Maybe that freaked them out a little.
With like a harpoon gun?
I mean, yeah, that's cosplay.
Yeah. No,
I was
that's
just
justifiable.
totally into this thing, dedicated.
I understand. You can't bring that harpoon gun to a con, so you gotta find other ways to incorporate your cosplay into everyday life.
Yeah, in real life situations. It just didn't work out the way I thought it would, but hell of a way to start off the new year. Of course, my friends, we were talking about KaBlam, one of Nickelodeon's Nicktoons. This is actually, I'm excited to be getting into this because this is our second round of New Year's Nicktoons. We did the first 4 ever, which are kind of like the classics. We did those last year. We're going to have links up on our page to those in case you missed them, but that was, Doug, Rugrats, Ren and Stimpy, and then I believe Rocko's Modern Life. Yep, and then we actually covered Real Monsters during a Halloween special too. So we actually did cover 5 of them. 4 of them just happened to be in New Year's Nicktoons. And now I'm happy to say this is the second round of that to kick off 2016. So Happy New Year to everybody.
Happy New Year, guys and gals.
Good times.
And robots.
Yeah, and robots.
I'm glad you're listening.
In the year 2016.
Oh, boy.
So in case you're not super familiar with what exactly KaBlam was, I feel like the other ones are kind of like household names. Everybody knows what they were. They had movies made about them, a lot of merchandise. KaBlam was a whole different beast entirely. So we're going to walk you through the history. Sean's going to kick us off with that.
Right. So KaBlam is an American animated...
Composed of King Django, Victor Rice, and members of the Toasters and the New York Ska Jazz Ensemble. The music in this thing was one of my favorite things. Once it queued up when we started watching it, it definitely took me back.
Yeah.
Took me back, not aback. Yeah.
I was actually really surprised to read that it was the Toasters because I actually saw the Toasters perform in Pittsburgh.
Oh, nice.
At Club Laga.
Yeah.
When it was still around.
Right.
And so that was, and I loved, I guess I started probably listening to ska in 94,
I was going to say it was the mid 90s. So like this thing fit
so that was like third wave ska was in full effect at that time. I had no idea that it was the Moon Ska Stompers. Until we were doing a little bit of research for this.
Yeah,
and so it makes sense that even when I was 16 years old, I was still absolutely watching this show on television because maybe just subconsciously for the music, maybe just because I like cartoons.
Yeah, I think both are totally acceptable.
Yeah, it's going to be
the Toasters I recognize more. I just like that it said like members of the Toasters. So it could have just been like one guy who did like a hi-hat. And that was it. That's our member. But since this one actually has, since KaBlam is a variety show, which is something that we haven't seen before, especially from the Nicktoons, we are going to walk you through some of the synopses for the individual segments. Now, we're not going to cover all of them, but since we watched the first episode of the entire series tonight, these are the segments that are covered within this one.
Sketch comedy that ran on Nickelodeon from 1996 to 2000. The show was developed as a fully animated showcase for alternative forms of animation that were more common in indie films and commercials. Each episode featured a collection of short films in multiple innovative styles of animation, bridged by the characters Henry and June, who I remember so fondly the second they jumped up on the screen.
Yeah.
Henry and June would introduce the shorts and have adventures of their own in between these different shorts. Although Snick aired many Nicktoons, KaBlam was the only Nicktoon created specifically for Snick.
Yeah,
and if you're unfamiliar with Snick, it was Nickelodeon. It was Saturday Night Nickelodeon.
That's right. It was the big orange couch, if I remember correctly.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
That
I
was
always
when they
wanted one of
had,
those in the house.
Yeah. Who didn't?
Yeah.
When you watched Nickelodeon back in the day, and they did stuff like Super Toy Run and Big Orange Couch and sliming everybody that was, possibly on screen at any point, how could you not want to be involved with all of those exciting, awesome, fun, cool-looking things that everybody else is having such a grand time? You're like, I want to get involved in that. And they're like, do it. Just send a self-addressed, stamped
SASE.
envelope,
Yeah.
and enter into these contests. And I did.
Yeah, I mean, who didn't, honestly?
Yeah.
I did all the time. Went through so many damn stamps. My parents are probably just like, all right. Hello and Happy New Year from Saturday Morning Cartoons, the weekly podcast that revisits, reviews, and ridicules some of the world's weirdest animated series. Kicking off our second round of New Year's Nicktoons, I'll be your New Year's baby, Dave Trumbore. Joining me, as always, my super strong and super naked co-host, Sean Paul Ellis. How's it going, buddy?
David. I'm doing well. How about yourself, buddy?
I'm doing good. I'm a little, maybe not concerned, just curious as to what's going on with your super nakedness tonight.
Just did one of those polar bear plunges.
Ah, that explains it.
As a cosplay character, though.
Oh, so you didn't actually do it?
No, I did it. But I did it in character.
Wow.
Like, I dressed in cosplay. It's just naked.
That's dedication, though.
Yeah. I went as you may have known him. It's from a little short called Action League Now.
Oh, yeah, that actually does sound familiar.
Yeah, I went as the Flesh.
Oh, the Flesh. That makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense. I
That's
went
why
as
I'm naked.
Stinky Diver, and it did not do well. Nobody really wanted to come up and hang out.
Well, a lot of people are also probably mildly upset because you're supposed to be doing like a polar bear plunge where you run into a freezing cold lake, but you were wearing thermals.
Yeah, no, totally. I can't do the cold thing. I was just in full. I think they actually got smart. They were like, you write the letter, put it in an envelope, and we will put a stamp on it for you and put it in the mail. Those fuckers went right in the trash, I'm sure.
Yeah,
I'm sure they're just whoop.
Like letters to Santa.
Well,
and letters that had my hopes and dreams in them.
Yeah, they all go to the same place. This is why
crumpled.
I just throw my mail in the air at this point because it accomplishes about the same amount of things.
Dave's Postal Service is known for 100. Look, if you are going to do anything, make sure that you're doing it 100%. And the best thing about Dave's Postal Service, 100% your letter is not going to fucking get delivered.
No, we have a much better failure rate than stamps.com at this point. We're roughly on the same level as the U.S. Post Office.
Or Panitney Bose.
Yeah. We're all in the same ballpark. It's a little spin-off we've done here.
Yikes.
But since KaBlam is just kind of such like a wide-ranging thing, we've actually got a bit more history for you guys. So the segment creators for this show include David Fain, Tim Hill, Steve Holman, Emily Hubley, Mark Merrick, Mike Perlstein, Mo Willems, and Coat Zellers. And I feel like you've probably never heard of those names. I never have. So I feel like just to give them at least one shout out here on the podcast would be a nice thing to do because there were so many segments that were created for this show over the years. You have to give them their due.
Right.
The theme song, which we'll definitely get into here in a second, the theme song and all the original background music on the show was provided by the Moon Ska Stompers, a band composed